Hey everyone, it's Lem, and I'm here with Abby for, a deep dive into a truly mind-bending book set.
Be sure to stay until the end of the video because we have a free gift for you.
Yes, stick around for that and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel while you're at it.
Buckle up.
Okay, so these books, One Nation Under Blackmail, Volumes 1 and 2 by Whitney Webb.
Yeah.
They are dense, but trust me, the information is wild. It's like peering behind the curtain of power and seeing all these connections between organized crime intelligence agencies and the business elite.
Absolutely.
Ready to dive in?
I am.
All right, so Webb kicks things off by introducing us to some major power players from the early 20th century. She talks about Carlos Marcello, this notorious crime boss who inherited a Louisiana casino operation and was allegedly involved in a massive drug network with intelligence ties called the French Connection.
Right.
What struck me about this story is how it reveals the blurred lines between organized crime and intelligence operations, especially during that era.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Marcello's story, as Webb lays it out, suggests that these two worlds weren't always so separate. The French Connection wasn't just some underworld operation. It allegedly had tentacles reaching into intelligence agencies, hinting at a level of cooperation, or at least a blind eye being turned. This sets the stage for a lot of what Webb uncovers in the rest of the books.
It's like this web of connections, and we're just starting to untangle it. Speaking of connections, Webb then dives into the Bronfman family. Specifically, Sam Bronfman's rise to power in the liquor industry during Prohibition. Now you might be thinking, okay, liquor, what's so shady about that? But his story is full of intrigue.
Oh, yeah.
He was tied to the Hudson's Bay Company and had this fierce rivalry with Louis Rosenstiel, another big name in the booze business.
And this is where things start to get really interesting.
Oh boy.
Webb suggests that Bronfman's success wasn't just due to business savvy. She hints at potential connections to criminal elements, possibly even leveraging those connections to gain an edge in the cutthroat world of Prohibition-era liquor. And his rivalry with Rosenstiel, well, that gets even more complicated when you factor in the allegations of sexual blackmail.
Whoa, hold on. Sexual blackmail, are we talking like J. Edgar Hoover levels of shady here?
Potentially even more tangled mess. Webb implies that Rosenstiel might have been involved in a sexual blackmail operation, possibly linked to J. Edgar Hoover and Roy Cohn. We're talking about figures with immense power and influence, and this raises serious questions about how such tactics were used to protect illicit activities and exert control.
Okay, so we've got organized crime intelligence agencies, and now blackmail thrown into the mix. It's a pretty potent cocktail. And remember, we've got a free gift waiting for you at the end of the video for sticking with us on this deep dive. Don't miss out.
Now, Webb doesn't stop there. She takes us into the world of Henry Crown and his Material Services Corporation, which boomed during World War II. And guess what? There are potential connections to Jake Avery and even the Roosevelt administration.
Wait, so we're talking wartime profiteering?
Yeah.
Maybe even with the government's blessing?
That's what Webb's investigation suggests. It's fascinating to consider how these connections might have allowed Crown's business to thrive during a time of global conflict. It highlights how political influence can be leveraged for economic gain even during wartime.
It's amazing how Webb weaves these seemingly disparate threads together. She then moves on to the Pritzker family and their rise in the hotel industry. But there's a twist. Their tax attorney, Burton Cantor, allegedly had ties to both intelligence agencies and international criminal networks. It's like every corner you turn in these books, you bump into another shadowy figure.
The Pritzker case really drives home the recurring theme of these books, the interconnected nature of seemingly separate worlds. It's not just business intelligence and organized crime operating in isolation. They intersect and overlap in ways that are often hidden from public view.
It's starting to feel like an iceberg, right? We're just seeing the tip, and there's this massive hidden network beneath the surface. And this is just the beginning of our deep dive. Make sure you stay tuned because it gets even wilder. And don't forget about that free gift.
Next, Webb takes us into the world of Zionism and organized crime. She delves into the documented role of organized crime in arming the Haganah, which was the precursor to the Israeli Defense Forces. This is where figures like Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel come into play.
So we're talking about notorious gangsters playing a role in the formation of a nation. That's a pretty mind-blowing connection. What exactly was their involvement, and how did it tie into this larger web Webb is uncovering?
It's a complex story. But essentially, Webb presents evidence that organized crime figures, particularly Jewish American gangsters, were sympathetic to the Zionist cause and saw the need for a Jewish state. They allegedly used their networks to smuggle weapons and funds to the Haganah, which was fighting for Israeli independence.
It's wild to think about these figures known for their ruthlessness and criminal enterprises being involved in something with such historical and political significance. It really challenges our perceptions of who these people were and the forces at play during that time.
And remember, this was a time when the world was still reeling from World War II, and tensions in the Middle East were incredibly high. The creation of Israel was a deeply contentious issue, and Webb's research suggests that organized crime played a significant, albeit hidden, role in that process.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to this already intricate story. And we're just scratching the surface here, folks. There's so much more to unpack.
Yeah, we can't talk about this web of connections without mentioning Roy Cohn, one of the most notorious figures of the 20th century. He seemed to know everyone from politicians to mob bosses, and his alleged use of blackmail was legendary.
Roy Cohn is like the ultimate connector, right? He pops up everywhere in these books, and his story is insane. Alleged blackmail connections to J. Edgar Hoover, feuds with the Kennedy family. You name it. Where do we even begin with this guy?
Well, Webb argues that Cohn is a central figure in this narrative because he embodies the blurring of lines between law politics and organized crime. He was a master manipulator who wielded power through intimidation connections and, as Webb suggests, blackmail. His influence was vast, and his tactics were often ruthless.
It's like he was playing a different game, entirely operating outside the rules that most people had to follow. And it seemed like he always managed to stay one step ahead of the law, even when facing serious accusations.
His legal battles are almost unbelievable. Webb covers his involvement in the United Dye stock swindle and the Fifth Avenue coach lines case. These were high-profile cases, and yet Cohn managed to escape conviction despite the evidence against him.
It's almost like he had a magic touch, or maybe he was just that good at manipulating the system. But there's a darker side to this, right? Webb implies that Cohn's ability to evade consequences was due to his powerful connections and his willingness to use any means necessary to protect himself and his interests.
Exactly, and this is where the concept of kompromat comes into play. It's a Russian term that basically means compromising material information that can be used to blackmail or discredit someone. Webb suggests that Cohn was a master of kompromat, using it to silence his enemies and maintain his grip on power.
So we're talking about a guy who was not only connected to the underworld, but also allegedly used those connections to gather dirt on people and wield that information as a weapon. It's chilling to think about.
And it's important to remember, this isn't just some historical curiosity. The tactics and networks that Webb describes in these books have implications for how power operates today. Think about the role of information, disinformation, and blackmail in our current political landscape. It's a continuation of the same patterns, just in a different form.
That's a really good point. We're not just talking about some bygone era. This is a story that's still unfolding today, and we're going to delve even deeper into this rabbit hole as we continue our deep dive.
Before we move on, there's one more stop on our journey through the early part of Webb's investigation, the Claremont Club in London. It was a gambling club, but it was also a haven for influential figures with ties to arms-dealing international finance and intelligence.
So it was like a real-life version of those smoky backroom deals you see in movies where powerful people gather to make decisions that impact the world.
Exactly. The Claremont Club was frequented by figures like David Sterling, Sir James Goldsmith, and Walter Rowland. These weren't just gamblers, they were movers and shakers with connections to all sorts of shady dealings.
And I bet there's a Roy Cohn connection here somewhere, right?
You guessed it. One of the key figures associated with the Claremont Club was Adnan Khashoggi, a Saudi arms dealer who later became a client of Roy Cohn and even Jeffrey Epstein. It's almost like all roads lead back to Roy Cohn.
It's uncanny, right? He's like the Forrest Gump of shady dealings, popping up at every major event.
What's fascinating about figures like Khashoggi is how they connect seemingly separate events and scandals, revealing a deeper web of relationships and hidden agendas. The Claremont Club is a perfect example of this. It wasn't just a place for gambling, it was a hub for international intrigue, with figures like Khashoggi operating in the shadows, brokering deals, and connecting powerful individuals.
This is seriously mind-blowing stuff, and we're just getting started. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into One Nation Under Blackmail, where we'll explore even more shocking revelations. And don't forget about that free gift waiting for you at the end of the video.
Welcome back. Before we delve further into this web of intrigue, remember to stick around until the end of the video. We've got a special gift waiting for those of you who are curious enough to stay with us on this deep dive.
That's right. Now, before we went on our little break, we were talking about the Claremont Club and all those shadowy figures connected to it. Webb introduces us to John G. Brody, a private investigator mentored by, you guessed it, Roy Cohn. Brody had this link to Clinton and Ryan, who backed a private intelligence outfit connected to the CIA. So,
Broady's story is important because it illustrates how private investigators were often employed in this shadowy world. They acted as intermediaries, gathering information, conducting surveillance, and sometimes even engaging in more nefarious activities.
it's like a whole hidden layer of operatives working outside of official channels.
Yeah.
You start to wonder just how much of what happens in the world is influenced by these networks operating behind the scenes.
And that's a question that Webb keeps coming back to throughout the books. Who's really pulling the strings and what are their motives?
Okay, so next up, Webb takes us to Southeast Asia with Operation Paper, a CIA-led initiative that involves some pretty interesting characters, including a banker named Paul Helliwell who allegedly had organized crime ties. Now, this operation gets really murky because there are allegations that the CIA was indirectly supporting drug traffickers through it.
Operation Paper is a prime example of how these covert operations can have unintended consequences, or perhaps, as Webb suggests, the consequences were intended all along. The allegations of CIA involvement in the drug trade are certainly controversial, but Webb presents a compelling case based on her research.
It's like this moral gray area where the lines between fighting communism and profiting from illegal activities become blurred. You have to wonder, what were they willing to overlook to achieve their objectives and at what cost?
Those are the tough questions that Webb forces us to confront. Now, speaking of morally ambiguous figures, we need to talk about Ed Wilson, a CIA operative who became a millionaire through his involvement with Task Force 157.
This guy sounds like he was straight out of a spy novel. Didn't he have something to do with destabilizing the Australian government?
That's one of the allegations surrounding Wilson and Task Force 157. This unit was involved in all sorts of covert activities, including arms dealing, training paramilitary forces, and potentially even interfering in foreign elections. Wilson's story is a cautionary tale about the potential for individuals within intelligence agencies to go rogue and use their skills for personal gain.
It's a reminder that power, especially when it's shrouded in secrecy, can be easily abused. And remember, we've got a free gift waiting for you at the end of the video for staying with us on this journey into the heart of one nation under blackmail. Don't miss out.
Now, Wilson wasn't operating in a vacuum. Webb connects him to Ted Shackley, a veteran CIA operative who allegedly ran a private CIA with figures like Thomas Clines and Edwin Wilson.
Wait, a private CIA? What does that even mean? Were they like a freelance spy agency?
Essentially, yes. Shackley and his associates had a network of companies and individuals that they used to carry out covert operations, often for private clients or foreign governments. They were involved in arms trafficking, training mercenaries, and all sorts of activities that would make James Bond blush.
It sounds like something out of a Hollywood thriller, but this was all too real. And it raises some serious questions about accountability. If there are private entities operating with the same capabilities as intelligence agencies, who's overseeing them and what are they up to?
That's a question that's still relevant today with the rise of private military contractors and intelligence firms. Webb's research sheds light on the historical roots of this phenomenon and the potential dangers it poses.
Okay, we're about halfway through our deep dive, and I'm already feeling overwhelmed by all these connections and revelations, but we're not stopping here, folks. There's so much more to uncover, including one of the biggest political scandals in American history, the Iran-Contra affair.
Yes. Iran-Contra, this is where a lot of the threads we've been following converge. Essentially, the Iran-Contra affair involved the Reagan administration secretly selling arms to Iran in exchange for the release of American hostages.
But there's a twist, right? They weren't supposed to be selling arms to Iran because there was an embargo in place.
Exactly. And to make matters even more complicated, the funds from the arms sales were then funneled to the Contras, a rebel group fighting the socialist government in Nicaragua. The whole operation was illegal and shrouded in secrecy.
And this involves some of the key players we've been discussing, right? Like Oliver North, who was a National Security Council official at the time.
Absolutely. North was a central figure in the Iran-Contra affair, along with Richard Secord, a retired Air Force general who had connections to the private CIA network that we talked about earlier. They used their connections to facilitate the arms sales and the transfer of funds.
It's like a tangled web of covert operations, political maneuvering, and illicit financing. And this wasn't just some rogue operation. It involved high-ranking officials in the Reagan administration, including, as Webb suggests then, Vice President George H.W. Bush.
The allegations surrounding Bush's involvement are certainly provocative. Webb points to his connections to the supermarket, which was a network of private arms dealers and financiers involved in the Iran-Contra affair. It's a reminder that even those at the highest levels of government can be entangled in these shadowy networks.
It's mind-boggling to think about the level of deception and the potential consequences of these actions they were dealing with. Hostile regimes funding armed groups and potentially putting American lives at risk, all for some hidden agenda.
And remember, this wasn't just about American interests. It was about geopolitical maneuvering, proxy wars, and the struggle for power on a global scale. The Iran-Contra affair is a stark reminder of how complex and interconnected the world truly is.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, folks, but we're not done yet. Stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive into One Nation Under Blackmail, where we'll explore even more shocking revelations about financial scandals, intelligence agencies, and the rise of Jeffrey Epstein. And don't forget, there's a free gift waiting for you at the end of the video. Welcome back to our deep dive into Whitney Webb's One Nation Under Blackmail. If you've made it this far, you're in for a treat. We've uncovered a lot of unsettling information, but the story doesn't end there.
And don't forget, those of you who stay with us until the very end will get a special free gift. We appreciate you sticking with us as we unpack these complex and often disturbing events.
Absolutely. Now, before the break, we were discussing the Iran-Contra affair and the implications it had on a global scale. It's mind-blowing to think about how these events unfolded and how interconnected everything seems to be.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle where each piece reveals a bigger, more unsettling picture. And as we move into the next chapter of Webb's investigation, we encounter another massive scandal, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI.
BCCI. That name rings a bell. Wasn't that one of the biggest financial scandals in history?
It absolutely was. BCCI was a global bank. But behind its facade of legitimacy, it was allegedly involved in money laundering, arms trafficking, and all sorts of financial fraud. It's a perfect example of how seemingly legitimate institutions can be used as fronts for criminal activity.
But who was behind it all? Who was pulling the strings at BCCI?
Well, Webb points the finger at some familiar faces. She discusses William Casey, the CIA director under Ronald Reagan, and his alleged role in directing BCCI activities. It raises serious questions about the CIA's involvement in illegal activities and its potential use of a global bank for its own purposes.
So we're talking about a potential link between the U.S. intelligence community and a massive international criminal enterprise. It's hard to wrap your head around the scale of it all.
And it gets even more disturbing when you consider the implications. If intelligence agencies were using BCCI for their own ends, what else were they involved in? What other secrets are lurking beneath the surface?
It's a chilling thought. And this leads us to the final chapter of Webb's investigation, one that has captivated the world's attention in recent years, the rise and fall of Jeffrey Epstein.
Epstein's story is a tragic and disturbing example of how wealth and power can be used to exploit and abuse others. He was a financier with ties to powerful figures, but behind his glamorous facade, he was allegedly running a sex trafficking ring that preyed on vulnerable young women.
And this is where Ghislaine Maxwell, whom we discussed earlier, comes back into the picture, right? Wasn't she Epstein's partner in all of this?
According to Webb's research, Ghislaine Maxwell played a central role in Epstein's operation. She allegedly recruited and groomed young girls for Epstein and his powerful associates.
But what was her motivation? Was she just complicit in Epstein's crimes, or was there something more to her involvement?
That's one of the biggest mysteries surrounding this case. Webb suggests that Maxwell might have been more than just a willing participant. She explores the possibility that Maxwell, given her family's history and alleged intelligence connections, might have been using Epstein's operation for blackmail purposes, potentially on behalf of intelligence agencies.
Hold on. That's a huge claim. Is there any evidence to back that up?
Webb doesn't present any concrete proof, but she lays out a compelling case based on circumstantial evidence, witness testimonies, and the patterns of behavior she's uncovered throughout her investigation. It's certainly a disturbing possibility to consider.
It's like this whole story comes full circle back to the themes of blackmail, compromise, and intelligence agencies operating in the shadows. It's a chilling reminder that power can be abused, and that those who wield it often operate outside the boundaries of law and morality.
And it raises a crucial question for all of us. What can we do to expose these networks of power and hold those responsible accountable?
That's the million-dollar question. Webb's books offer a glimpse into a world that most of us will never experience firsthand, but her research highlights the need for transparency, accountability, and a critical eye when it comes to those in positions of power.
We can't simply accept the official narratives at face value. We need to question, investigate, and demand answers.
Well said. One Nation Under Blackmail has certainly given us a lot to think about. It's been a journey through some dark and unsettling territory, but it's a journey worth taking if we want to understand the forces that shape our world.
And remember to grab that free gift.
To claim your free gift, just visit the link in the description below. And while you're down there, be sure to leave a comment and let us know what you thought of this deep dive into One Nation Under Blackmail.
We appreciate you joining us on this exploration of power corruption and the hidden forces that shape our world.
Until next time, keep those minds open, keep questioning, and keep searching for the truth.